being able to handle pushback with grace and calmness in our nervous system is a game changer. Welcome to the Connect Method Parenting Podcast, where correction is out, connection is in, and your kids want to listen to you. I'm Andy Martineau, creator of Connect Method Parenting, here to help you stay calm, confident, and connected no matter what. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're talking about the topic of hearing the word no from your kids, which we all hear, let's be honest, in a graceful way. I called it Hearing No Gracefully, and I'm excited to talk to you about it today. It's going to be a good one. Are you ready? We're going to talk about why we want to hear no gracefully. This is something I'm encountering with parents all of the time. It's also something we talk about in the Pivot and CMP Mastery often. So I wanted to talk about it here on the public podcast because it's an important topic. When parenting comes up, this comes up. If you're parenting, you're going to inevitably hear no. It just comes with the territory. It's part of what you sign up for when you sign up to be a parent. And I know, because I was here too, that a lot of y'all struggle with this. I also want to offer before we dive in that it's normal to hear no from your child and get emotionally activated. Hearing no brings up this primal fear of being rejected and then dying lonely out in the wilderness. So I'm here to normalize the no and invite you to take up a relationship with these no's that your kids give you. If you're ever in one of my programs, Pivot or CMP Mastery inside of League, the League of Extraordinarily Connected Parents, those are my two sub-programs, where we learn to parent with connection, not correction, which is my personal blend of attachment theory with some other things that help us really get those neural pathways locked in. If you're in one of those programs, one of the things you're going to know is that it's always safe to not be graceful. I create a container where we do a lot of open, vulnerable conversations where we talk about triggers and things that, we don't want to just share with anybody, but we don't shame people for messing up or not getting their parenting right. Because let's be honest, nobody gets their parenting right and everyone messes up. And I want people who come in and work with me to know that there is no shame. There is no shame in not getting your parenting right, in yelling or losing your cool or lecturing, giving ultimatums, resorting to some punitive consequence, or trying to incentivize our kids with a reward that we feel a little bit, we're not sure if it was the right move. We don't shame people for doing that because we're all learning and growing. Nelson Mandela said it perfectly when he said, and I'm summarizing, so the quote might not be exactly this way, but he said something like, we never fail, we only learn and grow, or he never fails, he only learns and grows, because that's what happens if we learn from every quote unquote failure. And that process of noticing, hey, I just messed up, I'm going to admit it, I'm going to talk about it, because that's me looking at it with curiosity and compassion and moving forward. That's the path. That is how we gain awareness. We make changes and then we go practice. And that's what we do. That's what we have to do in order to get good at parenting. We have a saying inside of League, if you could have done better, you would have. It's the truth. I've never worked with a parent who, on reflecting a situation that they wish had gone differently, won't say to me, if I could go back in time, I would have showed up more loving, more kind, more compassionate. Sure, I might have needed to still be really firm, but I would have done it differently. And one of the things we learn to get better at inside of League is to get a lot less attached to our kids' behavior. You're able to hear no's and handle it gracefully and not make it mean anything about your child or you. And when you don't make it anything about your child, it means that your prefrontal cortex gets to stay on and you get to stay in service of your child, and your highest parenting self gets to come to the forefront because your nervous system isn't triggered, which results in you having an emotional takeover by your limbic system. So thank goodness for knowing how to do that. I mean, that is everything. Realizing that, yeah, if I could have done better, I would have, and I couldn't. So let me figure out what was throttling me, what was capping me at a lower potential. So that's what we're going to talk about on this episode. We're going to talk about how to not take it personally, how not to get triggered when your child says no. And I'm using no as a representation of any pushback, any resistance that your child has to a direction or a request you make of them. So we're going to talk about this and how to stay compassionate and firm even if they say no. A lot of times you're going to hear no from your child, but the reality is if you show up in a compassionate way, in a, hey, I'm on your side kind of way with a regulated nervous system, they turn into a yes. I always say, I want you to think about it like this. At their core, your child wants to be connected to you. They have an innate desire to want to have a safe, trusting relationship with you. They want to be loved and accepted. But what happens when we don't understand the power of connection and we aren't great at getting our nervous systems regulated, so we get dysregulated when our kids push back, we show up in a way that sets them up to say no. We try to control or manipulate, although we don't like that word, but when we're trying to control them, we're trying to get them to do what we want. And sometimes we're missing out on what's really best for them or what's going on for them, and we just bulldoze through instead of trying to create that working relationship first. And we come by it honestly. Heck, this is what society has taught us to do. But regardless, when we do this, our kids' nervous systems say, no, you can't control me. At the core of human needs is this desire, this need to have freedom, choice, agency. And so that instinct will kick in if their kids sense that we're overly controlling, overly trying to get them to do what we want to do. And man alive, even if they want to say yes, sometimes they feel compelled to say no. Have you ever felt that way with another adult who ultimately what they're wanting you to do, you're in total agreement, but because of the way they're trying to get you to do it, you feel compelled to not do the thing. So your kids show up from the hospital pre-programmed biologically for togetherness. We're tribal creatures. We know instinctively as a young person that our survival is dependent on the relationship we have with an adult because that adult provides for our needs. And since we can't provide them for themselves, we really need them. But because as this Western society, we have been taught that discipline is the essence of parenting. And we've been taught that the way to quote unquote teach a child a lesson is through a consequence, which is really just a euphemized way to say punishment most of the time. We start screwing up this natural instinct with our child pretty early on. And often by the time they're a tween or teen, and naturally at the tween to teen stage, they're needing to pull away. They're becoming less dependent on us. And so they're even more apt to say no in a pretty loud and defensive way. Let me pause here for a moment because regardless of how connected we are as parents, our kids are going to say no. And it's important that they do say no, but they'll start saying no more frequently and in a more defensive way if we aren't careful, which I'm not going to fully explore that whole dynamic here, but the defensive detachment, the alpha posture, the defensive reattachment that can make parenting so challenging is real. It's fixable, but it's challenging. And I want to just reiterate that we don't have to deal with all of that as strongly. It's fixable, more challenging, and sometimes it's what happens because of trauma and situations in families. But if we make our North Star of parenting connection, we're going to have a lot less problems. So regardless of how epic you are with your parenting or how much you've struggled with your parenting, you're going to hear no from your kids. And I'm using no symbolically to represent the broader scope of pushbacks and resistance that your kids are inevitably going to give you. My oldest started saying no at maybe 8 or 10 months when he refused to eat the smashed up baby food peas that I tried to feed him. And it was a very firm, no way, Jose kind of, don't tell me what to do. He was not going to eat those things no matter how hard I tried. He communicated this no without any words, simply by spitting those green mushy peas all over the wall, all over the floor, and all over me. Let's be honest, I was a mess. And it took me quite a few attempts to try to get him to eat peas before I realized it was a firm no. And learning how to take that no and every other no that started to come from him and all of my other kids has been a process. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder. It's one of the things we talk about in the pivot. And if you come in the next round, you're going to learn how to hear no gracefully so that you don't react in a way that just makes the situation worse. So let's take a real life situation here. Imagine that you noticed earlier that day that your child's room was extremely messy. So when they came home from school, you'd been thinking about it for hours and you were a little annoyed and secretly thinking how lazy and entitled they were, or not so secretly thinking. Let's be honest. It's sometimes really challenging to not have a negative thought cycle spin about our child's behavior. We get better at that, and it's magical when we do. Things start really shifting when we let go of that, which is the opposite of what our logic wants to tell us, what our brain wants to tell us. So let's go back to the situation. Your child just comes home from school. You've been brooding and spinning about their messy room all day. Maybe you asked them to clean it up yesterday and it didn't get done. And so you're in the kitchen picking up some stuff, and you just loudly ask them from across the room to go pick up their bedroom. And it's just laced with frustration and a little sprinkle of irritation. I like to say emotions flavor our words, just like seasoning flavors our food. And so you say it in this way, and that, the words drift over to them, and they sense exactly what you're putting out. There's these things that mirror neurons that scientists have found that do just exactly what I just described. It sounds a little sci-fi, but we send out an emotional frequency, an emotional message by our body language and by our words. And our kids are masters at interpreting those messages and understanding exactly the emotional state we're in. So they hear this request that's laced with a little bit of resentment, a little bit of frustration, maybe a dash of irritation, and their spidey senses, but really it's their mirror neurons and their nervous system picks up and they push back. They might have even wanted to clean room. They might have been frustrated or a little bit bothered by the room and wanted to go clean it up. But because of the way we make the request, they feel compelled to push back and say no. So how do you move forward? This is where it gets mind twisty for our brains, because we put ourselves in a scenario where we're not sure what to do next. And in society, we've been taught to respond, or really it's react, in a way after the fact that will try to fix the situation. From a developmental point of view, the solution is always going to come at the beginning of the scenario. I believe the word's the antecedent, which is not a word that any of us use on the regular, but it means what comes before instead of what comes after. So let's do this. So rewind the scenario. If we were watching it as a movie on a screen, I want you to think about this whole thing goes down. You make this request kind of in a shouty voice from across the room. They push back. It turns into a tug of war. He stomps out and you feel disconnected from your child and the room's still not clean. So pause, rewind, go 5 minutes before this happens. Cue it up in your imagination, knowing that if you go and run the tape the way it was, the outcome is disconnection. Now, here's where things are going to change. What if this was a choose your own adventure? Remember those? Do they make those anymore? Am I dating myself? When I was in elementary school, they were the rage and I loved them. I would sneak into my parents' food storage room so that no one would bother me, and I'd read them for hours and I could grab snacks at will. And I loved how they would let you decide the fate of the characters. And so that's what we're going to do right now. So we're coming to the part in the Choose Your Own Adventure where we have a few choices. And one is do it as we just played out. Choice 2 is you view the no as an opportunity to figure out where you went wrong, asking them to pick up their room. So let's say your brain says, yes, I want that one. That sounds way better. In the Choose Your Own Adventure novels, it would say, if you choose this option, turn to page 32. So let's say you turn to page 32 and it says, great choice. You address the situation, create more safety, and change the outcome to a yes instead of a no, ultimately helping your child clean their room. Well, that would be amazing. That's the outcome we want. Good relationship, clean room. We walk away as a parent we respect. That way, with this scenario, you could both feel really good about the situation because you don't have the pushback. That feels icky anyway. And you don't start the tug of war that ends in frustration and disconnection. But in order to do this, you have to believe that overcoming your child's objection, their no, is actually in service of them and you. And not trying to get them to do what you want at all costs has to be something you're okay with. Because that's never what I'm teaching, ever, ever, ever. Your child does want to have a relationship with you. Firmly believe that. They don't want to push back or feel disconnected from you. That feels icky. But some kids become no's in the process of us asking them simply because of how we show up and how we respond to them when they push back. other kids say no, but stay a no. So they stay pushing back because we respond to them in a grouchy, frustrated way, and our nervous system gets triggered. And so they put up their defenses and dig in their heels. And some kids would have been yes, but their mirror neurons pick up what we're sending out, the judgy, irritated vibes, and they unconsciously brace for impact and say no. And I could do a whole podcast on how to create a yes, but today we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to hear no gracefully. So tune in for that. Maybe I'll call it How to Create a Yes. I think that would be a great podcast. How we set ourselves up, how we really nurture the relationship, get clean on our mind and behavior so that we can show up in the best possible way and send out great vibes to our kids. And to be honest, this is How to Create a Yes is really where we're focused on it's both of these things. It's how to create a yes and how to gracefully navigate the no's. And that's what we're doing with Connect Method Parenting. That's what we're doing with the Pivot and in CMP Mastery, because it's knowing how to both set yourself up for success and your child up for success so that you can create an environment where your kids can thrive. But they're not little robots. So sometimes they're going to say no. Sometimes they're going to push back. So you need to know how to navigate that really beautifully too. So tune in later for How to Create a Yes. I'm just thinking about that. It sounds like a fun episode. I already have so many things I want to tell you about that. And to be honest, I just about turned this episode into that episode because I could easily see my brain going down and talking all about the environment and all the prep work, but you're going to have to wait for that one. So today, let's deal with the topic at hand, which no matter how pro you become at creating amazing connective parenting and getting lots of yeses and cooperation from your kids, you're going to get some no's from your kids. And you want to be able to become a pro at handling those no's gracefully. So we've been talking about the kids saying no. And in order to open the conversation, in order to keep us from going down the rabbit hole of a tug of war and having it end in a place that's disconnected, we need to create an environment where everyone feels safe and comfortable. And part of that is learning how to handle hearing no's gracefully. This is a master level skill. I think it's the work of getting really good at Connect Method Parenting, and it's par for the course, but it's, and when we sign up to be a parent, but it's one of the most important skills you can learn as a parent. In fact, if you could only do one thing, you had to choose one skill right now as a parent and master it for the next month or 6 months, this is going to be right on the list that I would recommend, because being able to handle pushback with grace and calmness in our nervous system is a game changer. Learning what to say when the kids push back, the right words, or creating that perfect chore system, which I have been caught in the loop of creating these beautiful chore systems, thinking that they're going to solve the problem, or asking people, what do you say when they do this? And trying to have little scripts for myself, which are both great and important. But no matter what we try to say, if it's inconsistent with how we're feeling, or no matter how great our chore system looks on our fridge, maybe it's printed on cardstock, or maybe you get one of those fancy digital calendars that I keep seeing online, which looks super slick. But regardless, like you get one of those slick calendars, you come up with all the perfect little things to say. What really matters is who you are being and what you're feeling when your kids say no, which if there's one thing I can guarantee you will happen with parenting is your kids are going to say no to you sometimes, or a lot of times. I've talked to so many parents who have spent gobs of time creating systems and practicing saying the right words. They have the consequences laid out if the kids don't listen. They have rewards if they do. I mean, I've done this. I had the Marno store where if kids listened and did the things, they got little trinkets that I had picked up at the dollar store. And I felt really good about my plan. It was a good plan, let's be honest, but I hadn't made a plan for how I was going to keep myself in a good place, regardless of how they acted. I hadn't decided how I was going to be when they said no. I hadn't practiced role playing in my head when the kids push back. How do I want to show up? How do I stay in a place where I respect the person I'm being? That's a foolproof plan. If you want a foolproof plan, is how do I gracefully hear the word no in a way that I respect, that I don't react to? So I didn't take that into account most of the first 8 years of parenting, 10 years of parenting. And I was constantly frustrated because I had these great chore systems that I'd revamped every month. It felt like maybe every couple months at the least, really trying to show up in a good way and come up with a new system. But I hadn't done the emotional nervous system work of how to hear no gracefully, because the kids aren't going to love all my systems. They aren't going to say, thanks, Mom, so much for telling me how to do my chores and making it ultra clear that I need to get my room clean. I mean, I had kids that liked cleanliness more than others and didn't mind chores, but even those kids after a while, and especially, they'd get tired of the system. And especially if I started showing up kind of controlly or needy. So no matter how fantastic your chore system is, how efficient it is, how well orchestrated you roll it out, there's going to be a day where your child's not going to feel like doing their jobs. They're not going to want to clean their room. They're just going to want to lay on the couch and chill, move at the pace of a sloth, perhaps. And they're going to say no, and either directly by saying no or by ignoring you, by their behavior, and knowing how to hear this pushback, how to hear what in our mind we might have deemed the dreaded no in a graceful way without getting dysregulated. If we have that figured out, if we know how to do that and we have the capacity to navigate the situation, no matter what our kids do, they say yes, they say no. Either way, it creates more connection at the end of the interchange versus less connection. This is a game-changing skill. It's master level. It's fantastic. And it allows you to show up in a way, regardless of how anyone else is showing up, that you really love and respect. And that's why I highly recommend, if you haven't gone through Pivot yet, that you get in the program. We're opening a new round in October. This is the last time we're going to open this year. So if you want to get in this year, it's a great time to get in. It's an 8-week boot camp. It's not for the faint of heart. It's for those parents who are ready to change to connective parenting, which is the key to your kids wanting to listen to you. So if you want in, get in this year. If not, we'll open up some rounds next year, but this will be the last round this year. Okay, so now I want to talk about 4 main times we hear no as a parent. When our child honestly doesn't hear us because they're so engrossed in something. When we make a request or give them a direction and they act like they don't hear us. When we come in hot and annoyed and make a request with an edge to it and they hear our request and say no. And when we're tired and overwhelmed and desperately pleading for them to do something and they say no. So I want to walk through examples of ways to be graceful when hearing no and things that your kids might say to you, ways you could create more connection, not less, in each of these scenarios. Then I want to end with some thoughts to think and some actions to take that would help you be able to hear no more gracefully. And then if you're wanting help learning how to take what we're talking about today and implement it in your life, go check out the Pivot. I'll put a link in the show notes. Okay, so first kind of no. Your child honestly doesn't hear you because they're so engrossed in something. So let's say your child's watching a show, playing Legos, wrestling with the dog. That's one of the favorites at our house, completely engrossed. And you try to say something from across the room to get their attention. In that moment, you're focused on them doing whatever you're asking. Maybe you're asking them to clean their room, but you're a bit oblivious to the fact that they literally didn't hear you. Maybe you ask again and again. I always say don't ask more than twice. If they don't hear at you after asking them 2 times, and there's probably something else going on. But let's say you forget that in this moment. You just keep asking them, and you'll get frustrated. So instead of going down that path, we're going to choose a different path, different adventure. And I want you to ask yourself this instead. Why do I think my child didn't respond to me just now? If we don't pause and ask ourselves this question, our defensive default subconscious story is most likely going to pop up with some non-productive thought like, this has to get done. They need to listen to me. You're going to most likely begin feeling irritated or frustrated or upset. But if we pause for a second, we've asked them twice, no response, and we ask ourselves this question, why do I think my child hasn't responded to me? You'll see the really simple reason why they didn't respond to you, or at least you're going to potentially be able to see it instead of just go into judgment mode. So if you ask yourself that question honestly and curiously, and you're not triggered, you might get an answer like, oh, they were engrossed or they are engrossed in something, and I didn't take time to create a working relationship with them prior to giving them a direction. This is you hearing no gracefully, giving them the benefit of the doubt and not letting your limbic system, which is that emotional center of your brain, take over. Because when your emotions go high, your thinking goes low, and we start doing things that are not smart. We just aren't the wisest version of ourselves when our emotional limbic system takes over. I call it going limbic. Part of hearing no gracefully is understanding why, not trying to get them to say yes, which is what I think sometimes parents think they're supposed to do, and realizing, hey, the goal isn't to get them to say yes. The goal is to understand what's going on. For me, I just want to understand why they showed up the way they did. There are so many possible reasons why they showed up the way they did, why they didn't respond, but you're not going to see any of those reasons if you don't take a second to look for them. Okay, let's talk about when we make a request or give them a direction and they act like they don't hear us. We can tell they heard us, but they are purposely pushing it out or maybe subconsciously pushing it out. They weren't so engrossed that they didn't hear us. Because when we're engrossed in something, playing Legos, watching a show, wrestling with a dog, our whole attention is on that activity and our brain filters out other stuff. So honestly didn't hear us. But in this case, we're going to set up the scenario where they did hear us. Maybe they even looked at us in the eyes as we made that request, but they don't want to hear us. They act like they don't hear us. So the theme of this is going to be, don't make the no about your child. Don't make it their problem. That's what I mean when I mean don't make it about your child. Don't make it about their faultiness. Don't judge them. Don't try to tell them they're wrong or they're rude. Instead, think about what you might have done during the interaction that might have helped create that no. Now, I'm not saying you blame yourself either. You're just getting curious about something you do have control over versus something you don't have control over. So be so kind and so compassionate to yourself, but also be honest and look at how you might have contributed to the no. So be honest about how you might have contributed to them saying no. What you don't want to say to your child in a situation like this is, you're ignoring me. Why are you acting like this? You're being rude, or some version of that. Because when we say that, it sounds like this is your problem. You're at fault. You need to do better. You shouldn't be acting like this. And I see a lot of us do this. It's not a good look. I've done it. It's not something I'm proud of. But these types of lines, these sentences we say to our kids comes from judgment. Your child didn't say, Mom, I don't think I should have to help around the house at all. They didn't say that. They just ignored you. Or maybe they tried to pretend that you didn't ask them to do something. Them not saying anything could mean a lot of different things. It could mean, what you're asking me to do right now is overwhelming and I don't think I can do it. It could mean to your child, I'm exhausted from school and I'm still reeling from what a friend said to me and I'm going numb because it really hurt. Or them ignoring you could mean, I wasn't very nice to a friend at school today and I feel really terrible about that. And I'm sitting here feeling a bunch of emotions, not able to cope. Or it could mean, I feel like you're always nagging me, Mom, and I'm not sure how to tell you this, but I don't like how we are right now. So one of the greatest things Connect Method Parenting has taught me is that we really don't know what's going on for someone else. Whether they're saying something or they're being silent, they're ignoring us, quote unquote, it's better if you don't assume anything. Don't assume anything negative. Just assume unconditional positive regard. And when I say this, this is akin to something Carl Jung said, which I love his philosophy of unconditional positive regard. But when I challenge you to think this way, it doesn't mean you're going to get taken advantage of, or your kids are going to walk all over you, or you're not going to be able to help your kids learn how to contribute to the household work. What it does mean is that you're going to be more equipped to problem solve what's going on in a productive way. Because when we can stay in a regulated state, give our kids the benefit of the doubt, have unconditional positive regard, not jump to some negative conclusion about why they're ignoring me today and think it's the worst case scenario, like they don't want to help around the house and they're lazy. When we don't let our brains go there, we get to stay in a place of curiosity and compassion and get to the bottom of what's really going on. We get to hear that no gracefully without becoming completely dysregulated. We get to solve the problem in a productive way. We get to take action in a way that we respect. So if your kids are ignoring you, what if you got curious instead of critical? What's the downside to doing this? I love asking myself and parents I'm working with this question because typically there is something that our brain is convinced is bad if we assume positive intent, if we give our kids the benefit of the doubt. We want to know what that is. It could just be, hey, my brain's just so used to thinking this that it feels scary to do anything else. Or because we've been immersed in behavioralism, we could have this default belief, and I did, where I thought if I don't come down with a consequence and tell them that that's not okay to ignore me, then they're going to just always be like this. Like that is going to, me having a consequence is what's going to solve the problem. That's going to get them to learn the lesson. That's going to fix the behavior. Here's the thing. It doesn't. Consequences, boundaries, rules are important. Don't get me wrong. They're important. They create safety. They create rhythm. They create structure. They don't teach lessons. Not really. Not that we can't communicate clearly and have our kids understand that, hey, if you don't fold your laundry, then we're not going to watch TV. But we can set that up in a way that is not punitive. Yeah, we do this before we do that, but we're not getting punished if we don't do this. We just don't get to do this because we have a flow to our house. I need to go into another episode about this, but what I want to hit home is that when you think the solution is what you do after the kids have misbehaved, we are mistaken. It's just not how problems are solved. Being curious and problem solving and trying to come together, whether with our child or by ourselves, and figure out what went wrong, beautiful. But a punitive, you don't get this, I'm taking away this privilege, that triggers their nervous system, creates more defensiveness and disconnection, which is the opposite of what we want to create, which is more connection, more understanding, more openness to cooperation, them being willing to hear us when we make a request without feeling controlled or manipulated. So what we want to focus on is what we do before, and we're going to use information from the no as we hear it gracefully. We're going to be able to get lots of great information to do better next time. But where we really fix it isn't in the heat of the aftermath of them not listening to us. It's in the growth that comes and the understanding that comes from situations that don't work well, that we use as a catalyst to become better, to create a more open dialogue, a deeper relationship that sets up both our child and us for better connection and better cooperation next time. So, unconditional positive regard, giving our kids the benefit of the doubt, do nothing but set us up to have a better outcome later. So if your kids are ignoring you and you get curious instead of critical, there's no downside. If you walked over to your child, made eye contact with them, connected with them, because you were calm enough to do this, you weren't so triggered and off the hook that you couldn't do this in a way that was calm and connected. So you go over there, you make eye contact, you establish a working relationship, you ask them if they heard you, and let's say they say yes, and you ask them if they were ignoring you. And if you don't make them wrong for ignoring you, you might just discover what was going on for them. You might have an eye-opening conversation, or they might not say much at all, but either way, it gives you a chance to connect and communicate with your child. And they're going to feel a lot different towards you. They're going to feel like, oh, mom didn't jump to conclusions. She's on my team. She's here for me, which begins momentum towards connection and cooperation that we want. So next kind of no. Okay, so you come in hot and annoyed. You make a request with an edge to your voice. They hear your request and they say no. All right, when you come into a situation like this and you think your job in that moment is to press to a yes, you will always show up needy and controlling, which doesn't feel good. If you have the belief, which I do very strongly, I have this belief that if my child says no to me, then there is a good reason that makes total sense to their nervous system. And it's my job to see this no as information and figure out what's going wrong or what's going on for my child. Then you're going to see the no very differently than if you feel your job is to press to the yes. So my firm belief is that your child is doing their best in any given moment, which, don't get me wrong, sometimes their best is way below their potential or really different than what they promised that they would do last night. But if you can get curious and try to understand what might be going on for them, try to understand what you might be doing to contribute to the situation as well, give everybody lots of grace and space, you're going to hear the no gracefully. Some thoughts I think are nothing's gone wrong. This makes perfect sense. Something isn't working for him right now. I'm here to set my child up for success. The only way to improve this situation, the only way to salvage it is to get curious and think, oh, I wonder how I could have heard their no even more gracefully. Or I think my child was unable to navigate this situation in a way that served them. How could I have helped them, or how could I help them pick up the slack? How can I make this more productive, this situation more productive? How can we grow from this? I believe this with my whole heart, that my child wants to be close to me. They want to feel seen and heard. They want to know I'm on their team. And then I think to myself, how can I provide that safe place for him even more? How can I hear the no even more gracefully and not get triggered when he pushes back? This is the greatest gift I could give him, a mother that can respond both compassionately and firmly. So I'm going to take 100% responsibility for what is mine. I'm not going to take responsibility for anything that's not mine. And I'm definitely not going to moralize anything. So what if it's true that my child is doing their best, and his best today means he believes he needs to ignore me? What if that's his best? If that's his reality, if that's where he's at today, how can I come alongside? How can I serve him? What does he need right now? Not what does he want, but what does he need? His words mean nothing about me. His behavior, his pushback, his no mean nothing about me. They're just beautiful information about him. So here's an example. I come in hot and edgy, and they say, you're not allowed to do anything else until you finally clean up your room. You've had all week, and it still looks like a dump in there. Your child responds with a nice, firm no. And you know in that moment there is really very little you can do that won't turn into World War III to force him to clean his room. So you're at checkmate. Your child's called your bluff. In this situation, you might want to go back in when you're ready and say something like, hey, I'm sorry for the edgy way I just said that. In fact, I disagree with the way I just behaved. I wanted to ask you to clean your room, and I don't like or respect the way I did it. It's clear to me that you don't want to clean your room right now. I get it. Sometimes I don't want to clean my room either. Especially when I was younger, I did not see the point. But we do have to clean the room. I know you said you feel overwhelmed. What if I helped you today? What if we turned some music on and I helped you clean the room? Now, hopefully they say yes. I was just actually talking to someone inside of my groups, and she said, she was sharing that this almost exact situation came up where the request was made to clean the room and he wasn't able to do it. And so by her coming in with great energy, with great thoughts about him, no judgments, and offering to help clean the room, he let her come in and clean the room. He said, yeah, you can come clean my room with me. And they got it done in no time. But sometimes they don't say yes. Sometimes they might still say no. How could you hear that no gracefully? Well, first, by letting that no be okay. So if they say no, first of all, being okay with the no is going to be huge. And if you have decided, let's say that they can't have their friends over until their room's clean, keep the family rule. I'm not saying you let it all go. So you might let it go, but you might not. Rules are there to keep us safe and to create a way of living that feels good to us. But your kids might have different ideas about what clean looks like or how often things need to be clean. So honoring them without making them wrong by also holding firm to your rules. This is the tightrope. This is the tricky thing. Tonight, we went on a little family walk, and as we left, the house was destroyed. That's my thought about it. It's not accurate. If I was doing a steer, I'd need to be more factual, but my brain was spinning, and the thought that was there, and I was working on being present to it, but the thought that my brain wanted to offer me was the house is destroyed. So I mentioned it to my girls because two of my girls went on the walk with my husband and I. We had this great trail that we were going down. It was beautiful. And I mentioned that when we got back, maybe we could do a 10-minute pickup rally. And they totally balked. They said, it's not that messy. No, it's not that messy, Mom. It's no big deal. There's hardly anything out. So they were saying no. And I took a breath, reminded myself it was fine that they said no. Don't expect them to see the house through the same eyes I see the house. And I really leaned into gracefully hearing it. So I came alongside and he said, hey, I hear you. I hear that you don't think it needs to be picked up. I totally get it. And they responded with yeah, the house is fine. So really another no to me wanting to clean it up. And I started talking to them. We connected a little bit. We laughed about some stuff, and they laughed at me a little bit and said, "Hey, Mom, come on. You're overreacting. The house isn't a big deal." They tried to change my mind. They clearly didn't want to do the 10-minute rally initially. And I kept just coming alongside and hearing them and agreeing with them. I'm like, I get it. You're probably right. We don't need to clean the house. I get it. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I understand. I'm so glad it doesn't bother you. This dialogue was, I attempted during this dialogue to validate them and to come alongside with them and not make them wrong. Then we started talking about something else completely unrelated. And when we turned back around from the walk and started heading back home, and we got a little closer, we were pretty close actually when I said this. They said, okay, we're just going to spend 10 minutes on the house. And here's the areas. They divided up the house. Who wants to take what? And everybody picked their area. I took the trash out. And by the time I got back, which was 2 minutes, 5 minutes at the most, almost everything was picked up. The house looked 90% better. They didn't need me to convince them that their no was wrong. They didn't need to be told that they were seeing the house through flawed eyes, that it was really messy. I didn't need to convince them of that. They just needed to be heard. They needed me to gracefully hear their no and respect it, not make it a problem. Let their frustration about my request come out, move through, get them back to a regulated parasympathetic nervous system state so that by the time we got home, they were willing to pitch in for 5 to 10 minutes. In fact, it was a 5-minute pickup. It really wasn't, when everyone pitched in, it wasn't bad and it didn't take very long at all. It was crazy fast, but there was no pushback once we got back to the house. So we turned that no into a yes just by validating and hearing them and not making them wrong. Everyone has the right to say no. It's just about us as parents being okay when our kids present that way. Having the posture of, this is fine, not a problem, I get it. And then that compassionate and firm limit still gets set and we get it done. So the last time we hear no, that is tricky for us. I mean, there's more than this, but the last one I'm going to talk about today on the podcast is when we're tired, overwhelmed, and we're in this desperate plea for them to do something and they say no. So if we're pleading with our kids to finally clean up their room, please, we've slipped into this dependent versus alpha role, and your kids need you to stay in the lead so their nervous system can rest and they can depend on you. It's just how nature has set up. It's set up development. So if you're tired and overwhelmed, which will 100% happen at some point, do the least amount needed to create safety and don't let your brain run away with anxious, catastrophizing thoughts about how if their room doesn't get cleaned right now, they're doomed to a life of laziness and entitlement, because it's just not true. You're just tired. Be honest with what you're capable of doing and only do that much. Try your best not to shame or blame your kids for not doing something, and just let yourself come back to it tomorrow when you're feeling more rested. It'll most likely still be waiting for you the next day when you're ready to show up in a more connected way. So there's no downside to doing the least amount necessary to make sure everyone is alive and healthy and safe. That bedroom getting cleaned up is not a necessity, even though your brain is going to scream at you that it is. Your children won't be lazy if the room is messy for another day. What matters is the state of your relationship as you navigate this messy room. We all react and lose our cool and get emotionally overwhelmed and rejected sometimes when our kids say no. It's par for the course. So some of this work is figuring out what you could have done better, and some of it is just showing up the best you can in this moment. And some of it is believing you're doing the best and learning from as many mess up experiences as possible so that you can iterate faster and learn how to grow and adapt. The key here is just learning from every experience. So it's naive to think your child's unintentional thinking or their thought errors, or really to them, they're not thought errors, they're just their perception of the world, aren't going to come and influence their decision, influence what they say to you. Am I going to agree with mom? Am I not? Am I going to do my chores? Am I not? But if you can notice what their thought errors are, you can start to realize what they are, not make them wrong for it, welcome them in, then we have something we can work with. So for example, one of my sons was, when he was a senior in high school, he started deciding that he didn't think cleaning his room was important. And he said something to me like this almost every day. He would say, Mom, I don't think it's important to make my bed, because I make my bed in the morning and then just a few hours later, I come back in, I go back to sleep, and it gets messy just, 12 hours later. So why would I go through all that work? It doesn't matter. At first, that no response, it surprised me. It bugged me. I thought it was ridiculous. So I took it upon myself to take up a relationship with this particular thought error that he was presenting to me. I knew that I needed to get that thought neutral in my mind. Otherwise, this whole conversation about him making his bed every day was going to turn into a tug of war. So I got to work and took 100% responsibility for neutralizing his no statement. And I asked myself, how does it make total sense he feels this way about making his bed? First, that it will get messy 10 hours later. Valid. Yeah, I get that. Maybe that it's a huge pain to make his bed. He was sleeping in a bunk bed at the time, and I could see that. It's a pain to make a bunk bed. His school started super early, so he didn't want to spend any time making his bed. He didn't want to get up 1 minute earlier than he needed to, and so it seemed like a waste of time potentially. And he's also becoming older. He was a senior in high school. He was becoming his own person, and he didn't want to be told what to do. And maybe he was just pushing back, saying, hey, you can't tell me what to do. So all of those were valid. I got it. I wrote and wrote and wrote those thoughts and a ton of other thoughts that I hypothesized might be convincing himself of the validity of his thought. I still didn't want to change our family rule, but now I wasn't triggered by his no. I was able to hear his no gracefully. I could respect his opinion without judgment or resistance. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't perfect. I'm not saying, and then I was perfect and I never got triggered, but I was so much better at navigating it. And once I finally got there and he could sense that I didn't have this neediness, I wasn't grasping, I wasn't trying to control him. I had dropped my instruction manual for how he should respond to me requesting him to make his bed. And I just had a request. We had a much better conversation about it. It wasn't a tug of war. It was really a meeting of the minds, and he understood that I understood him, and it was great. And the next morning, he made his bed. Now, I can't say he made his bed every day because he didn't, and he still didn't totally come on board with my perspective that it was a good idea, but we didn't have a fight about it, and there was so much more respect between us. And if I firmly made the request, almost every time he would go make his bed. So like I said, he started being more cooperative after I did my work. And what I just explained is really the first strategy of the CMP strategies, which is understand your own mind and behavior so you can leave room for theirs, which is what I did. We have a tool called Daily Peace, and I did the work of Daily Peace to get to my highest self, my most regulated, calm, compassionate, kind version of me so that I could relate to him in a way that I respected. And like I said, he didn't make it every day. And in fact, I remember him saying a couple times to me when I made the request that he made his bed, he'd say, okay, Mom, but I still think it's ridiculous. But he did make it more frequently. But it wasn't because I threatened a consequence. It wasn't because I guilt tripped him into it. It was because he decided he cared about what was important to me and wanted to do it, even though he never, and he told me this, he never would have done this on his own if it hadn't been a family rule. So hearing a no gracefully, which requires a lot of prep work, a lot of reflection, that's where the change really happens. And even if he had still stuck with his pushback and resistance, the scenario would have been better. The relationship would have stayed strong. And I would have crossed that bridge and it would have been okay. So I don't want to say that every time we do all the work that they instantly change, because that doesn't always happen, but we become changed by something that maybe we can't change and we show up better. And ultimately, I don't care about the bed. I care about the relationship. So that would have been my end game regardless if he had still been really resistant. And if he had really been resistant still, it was probably evidence of something else being off, whether it was with our relationship or just in his life, that I would have leaned into. So recap, you're meeting them where they're at, you're understanding them, you're trying to have compassion, come alongside, not make them wrong, neutralize the no, create that new neural pathway in your own brain so that you can show up in a compassionate and firm way. And yeah, that's hard, but you are here for it. You are here for it. So a few final thoughts. So I hope this was helpful to hear me go through how I've gotten to this place a few different times. I love reminding myself this isn't about me. I love asking myself, how can I love and understand them more in this moment? How can I have compassion? What would I want to hear? Recognizing that this is hard for them, even if my brain's not able to fully see why it's so hard for them, understanding like, yeah, this is hard for them. They don't want to do this thing. I want them to feel safe. I want them to feel supported, even if they say no. And I want them to feel my unconditional love and support for them, regardless of how they respond. I want to walk away from the situation respecting how I showed up. All of us as parents are going to have different ways of responding to our kids when they say no. And what matters is you do it in a way that feels in integrity with you. Just make sure you've really gone through the work to come from a place of caring and compassion so that you can see it from their point of view. So I've been working at this for a long time, and I both see how challenging it can be for our kids in situations, and it's easier for me to get to their point of view from things, but I still get stuck. So some of my go-tos to help me get there is to lean into compassion, to get curious and neutralize their behavior and see where that leads. Until this comes naturally for you, you can just borrow my thoughts from this episode. I'm not a big fan of parenting scripts because if it doesn't feel genuine to you, it's going to come off weird and not authentic to your kids. I just wanted you to get a feel for how it could be. Then you've got to figure out a way that you could take that conversation that you want to have with them about their pushback, about them saying no, that feels authentic to you, so that you can show up feeling compassionate and curious and, if needed, firm. So here are some action steps to take. When you hear a no, this is the process I want you to do. Get yourself regulated first. Take a deep breath. Notice your judgments and resistance. Like, they shouldn't say no. They should be willing to help. Why are they being so difficult? Step into your most compassionate self. Put your most loving hat on in that moment, the unattached hat, so that you're not making their no mean anything about them or you. Find love. Come from love. Come from compassion. Get curious. Listen. Believe they're doing their best, even if it's not great today. Come alongside. Help them do what they're not able to do on their own in that moment. Work through any anger, resentment, or judgment that comes up for you. Resentment doesn't feel good for you or your kids. Get good at looking for how you might be contributing to the situation. If you're wrapped up in the emotion of resentment or frustration, it takes away all of your compassion, curiosity, your openness, your love, your understanding. It takes you away from meeting them where they're at. It takes you away from your highest level of critical thinking. It takes you away from being able to hear their no gracefully. So notice if you're feeling that resentment or that frustration, and notice with curiosity and compassion and try to release it. So I hope that was really helpful. I'm going to always encourage you to join my program Pivot so that I can help you implement this and take it to the next level. But also I'm going to encourage you to listen to my free stuff here, free podcast, and learn as much as you can and take it away and implement it in your life. My ultimate goal is that Connect Method parenting becomes the new default for parents, that we realize that not only does it feel better, but we get much better results when we lean into connection, not correction. And if you're ready to take your parenting to the next level, the next round of the 8-week parenting pivot starts October 7th. So if you're listening to this close to the release date, then go check out the website, connectmethodparenting.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. If you're not listening to this close to the release date, go check out connectmethodparenting.com and see what we're offering right now so that you can take your parenting to the next level. All right, y'all, have a beautiful day. We'll see you next time. Bye. If you enjoyed this episode, you're going to want to check out the 8-week parenting pivot, which is the first phase of my program, the League of Extraordinarily Connected Parents. We're opening up a new round in October. So if you're listening to this live, it's going to be October 7th. If you're listening to this and that date has passed, go check out the website, connectmethodparenting.com, and we'll list the next time we're opening. But if you're listening to this live, go check it out because you can already apply and get accepted into the next round so that you can lock yourself in place to have a huge shift with your kids, to get them to want to listen to you, which is very different than using punishments, rewards, timeouts, ultimatums to get them to listen to you. We want it to be more cooperative. We want better listening. We want a great relationship, and we want to have a ton of fun when we're parenting. So if that's what you want, if what I talked about in this episode resonated, jump over to cmp.works/pivot. I'll put the link in the show notes as well, and find out more about the pivot, apply to join, and we'll let you know if you get in. All right. Until next time, go connect with your kids. Have a blast. And pop back in for another episode soon about how to use connection, not correction, to get your kids to want to listen to you. See you later. Bye.